Good evening. It's December 27th, 2013, and you're joining us for our weekly broadcast of a live webcast on LaRouchepack.com. This is our last webcast of the year 2013. I'm joined by Dennis Mason in the studio today to ask a series of questions, and of course, we're also joined by Mr. Lyndon LaRouche. Now, we've gotten our first question in from a contact who is very active in the institutions of government of the United States. And the questioner wishes to know the following. They say, Mr. LaRouche, President Obama's poll numbers are at an all-time low, driven by the obvious failures of Obamacare and Dodd-Frank, his two signature domestic policies. What is worse, a vast majority of Americans do not trust him or believe him anymore. Although you have been one of President Obama's longest and most outspoken critics, we have a two-part question for you. First, what would you advise President Obama to do in order to leave some positive presidential legacy? Second, what qualifications are you looking for in the next Democratic Party presidential nominee?
To put the fine turn on it, throw him out of office now. There is no reason to keep him in office. He's committed every possible offense. He's an ultimately impeachable individual. He's almost impeached before his birth as a result, retroactively, as a result of his behavior. No, he has to be thrown out of office. There is anyone in the United States government who thinks that Obama still has a contention to be still president of the United States has to be there's something very wrong with their mind. Here's a man who has done nothing from the beginning of his occupation of office, but act with fraud. His campaign for election was a fraud. And ever since then, fraud. His health care policy of the campaign to kill people was his first major subject as president. And he's been working downhill ever since that time. The problem here is worse than Obama. The problem here is that there has a procession of degeneration of presidents and presidential candidates especially, but presidents especially, since the murder of Kennedy, of President Kennedy. There has been no one qualified as president to really be president since that time. You have a number of people who are not bad people. You've had people who are good people, would qualify in many respects for presidential qualities, but they couldn't live up to the job, either because they were blocked out, as the case of Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan would have been a decent president, a good one. He tried to be, but he was flanked. He was flanked in his own office by the Bush family. And you have to remember that Prescott Bush, the ancestor of this crowd, was essentially the man who put Hitler into power in Germany. So these guys are no good. And therefore, the problem here we have is not merely we have the worst president in American history, by far. That's a very kindly appreciation of this creep. But the problem is that we've been losing quality both in presidential candidates and also in politicians generally. Very few of the leading politicians of the United States, elected politicians in the United States, have been actually able to qualify for president under these circumstances. You look at the record and look at, for example, school records. Take school classes since the time of Franklin Roosevelt. The school classes, the people entering schools and going on to secondary schools and universities, were poorer in each generation. That is, there may have been exceptions to that rule, but the general tendency, each class or each batch of classes that came after the one or the other was worse than the other as they came along. That this is a process. The problem here lies essentially, the symptomatic problem is the school system, the U.S. school system. Now, this is a part of a general moral degeneration which took over with the beginning of the process leading into World War I. And that process, from the ouster of Bismarck until the actual entry into World War I, was a process of general degeneration. For the people who were the greatest leaders in science in the 1890s, still in the 1890s, are the best. From 1900, the anniversary year of 1900, the century anniversary, there has been a degeneration in the quality of education in the United States because there was a degeneration in the quality of the candidates. And that's been the rule. Oh, there may be an exception here and there. There were exceptions, but that's exactly what they were. You would get 3 bums, and then you might get lucky with a president who would probably be assassinated or thrown out for some other reason. So the United States and actually the European system, the trans-European system, has been in a process of continuous degeneration since essentially the Bismarck was thrown out of office. That started the process. And the wars started then. The assassinations and wars started with the Bismarck expulsion. And it's been in that direction ever since. There have been exceptions. We'd have a good president comes in. He might get killed. He might, as McKinley. McKinley was a perfectly good president. So he was assassinated. Then you look at what you got in that array in the beginning of the 20th century. Look at what you had. Once McKinley was killed, what did you get? You got garbage all the way until Benjamin Franklin. Every president in that period elected to office after McKinley had been assassinated, and the assassination of McKinley was intended from the highest level. That's how it happened. But the same thing that happened to Jack Kennedy. And when President Franklin Roosevelt died, you had the grave diggers were already there. The Republican election, that fourth-term public election for the presidency, for the government, Senate, and so forth, that started the countdown. Now, as long as President Franklin Roosevelt remained in power as president in his administration, now he was dying at that point. He was in the process of dying. He was extremely weak from the effect of his sicknesses before. And the minute he dropped dead, as I've said recently, wrote again recently, my knowledge was, my first-hand knowledge, essentially, because there were 2 people walking down that corridor at the time that the OSS chief left office, was leaving the president's office. And he said to my friend, "It's over. It's all over." As they walked out the corridor from President Franklin Roosevelt's office out to the street. And that was the end. So you had some breaks in there, but then you got, once the death of Kennedy occurred, from then on, it was mostly downhill. There were some people who were not bad people. They had some good qualifications. They might have made a good president if they'd had an environment in which they could have become a good president. But with the last crew, the last bunch, under Vice President George W. Bush and his son, George W. Bush and Obama, we were already in the pit. And the Reagan administration was a failure precisely because the Bush family was involved in that. And that's the same Bush, Prescott Bush, the father of George H.W. Bush, who was the guy who put Hitler into power in Germany. But he did that as a part of a team, a British team. So the problem is we have in the United States no longer have what you can call a real president. The bums we've had in office are unfit to serve. They're morally unfit to even enter the White House, even as a guest. Every one of them. And they get worse and worse and worse. Now the question is, we're on the edge of a very interesting situation. First of all, the Bush and the company and their associates just lost a big one, because the plan had been organized by the British and with the support of Obama's crew, and Obama was nothing but a stooge for the British, that once they had failed to pull a swindle in which they were going to gain the ability to launch a thermonuclear war attack on Ukraine, on Russia, when the Ukraine did not go over to join Europe against Russia, that was the crucial point. That has been the crucial point at this time, which is what my answer on this question is based on this. So what had happened is this, is that the plan had been that they would have this thing rigged. If the Ukraine, which was being pulled into this thing, were to give in and become a part of the Western European system against Russia, then the U.S. forces and their allies would have then moved in with a military attack on Russia. And under those conditions, Russia would not be in a position to avoid a second strike situation. What happened is the minute the Ukraine did not capitulate to the gesture of the U.S. and Britain, then it was impossible, because of the relevant correlation of forces, for the United States and Britain and so forth to proceed with an attempted destruction of Russia. Russia had been defeated, and a defeat of Russia would have been a catastrophe for China and India and so forth. What has happened is, because of the shift, which is organized around a number of nations and is still being organized, we don't know how many of these nations are going to join in this agreement right now or not. We don't know. I wrote about this thing on exactly that basis. That's what my knowledge is. And therefore, now it's a standoff. The problem is that the issue here is not what was called a war. Not a war among nations, not a war among alliances. The intention of war here, in other words, any group of nation states, if operating simply as nation states, would now not dare to threaten a thermonuclear war on the planet. But this is not a war. It is a war that is not a war. In other words, it's not a war among nations. It's an imperial war. The intention of this war, as the Queen of England has said repeatedly over the past several years, her intention, the intention of the Anglo-Dutch forces inside Europe, and the intention of the leadership of the presidency of the United States has been to launch a preemptive attack to establish a world empire, and in the course of that, to reduce the population of this planet from 7 billion people presently to less than 1. The Queen's policy is less than 1. The warfare, the scheme, the whole thing is not a war. It's an extermination warfare. The intention is to reduce quickly the human population, which now has been ranging at about 7 billion people, to reduce it to less than 1. And the Queen has been repeatedly explicit on her intention. So we're not talking about a war. We're talking about something which is truly a hellish horror. The intention is, as the Queen has said again and again and again. Now, there's going to be a reduction of the human population at an accelerated rate from less than 7 billion people to less than 1. And that is in process now. As a matter of fact, the current program of the administration, the present administration, of the present president, is to start mass killing of the population. The cancellation, for example, of protection, of employment, the unemployment swindle, is a mass murderous program. The policy, what they're doing in Detroit, is a mass murderous program. The food policy of the administration, of the Obama administration, is a deliberate mass murderous attack upon the population of the nation as a whole. The Queen and others are fully ahead in moving toward a extermination warfare against the U.S. population, against the European population, against other parts of the world. So this is not a war. It's something much worse than a war. It's an extermination campaign. It's the Emperor Zeus, the principle of evil in all European history, Zeus. And that's where we are. That's what's happening now. And now, but the funny part about it, if you like what the funny part is, what happens now, the result is that in the zeal to kill Americans, kill people in the Americas, to kill people in Western and Central Europe, mass killing I'm talking about, not just killing, well, what they did is they destroyed the economy of the United States. The United States no longer has a serious economy. We don't have an auto industry. We don't have that kind of industry. We have little pieces of things like that, remnants of it. We have a process of accelerated mass death of people. And the way that is being done is by taking away their jobs, taking away their security, taking everything that keeps them alive, and then break them, turn them into less than slaves. The same thing is being done in Western and Central Europe. Therefore, Germany is one of the few areas that is somewhat exceptional in this area. They have some technology, serious technology. They're the only Central European, Western European nations that does now. So now what's happened is you've had an increase, a development. You divide the whole world into two areas. One area is the area of the transatlantic region. The transatlantic region is dying. It's not just mass murdering its people, it's dying. It still has a very powerful nuclear weapon capability, that area. But in the meantime, what's happened is China, which was not being treated seriously before because they thought they'd win the war before then. They thought that they'd crush Russia first, and if Russia got crushed, then China would have a very difficult situation. Now it's shown now that China has a very ponderous capability. Russia has regained a very ponderous capability as a result of a thing. We have now from Belarus all the way to the Pacific, we have a broad belt of major nations of Eurasia which are on the make. They're growing. They will tend to become more powerful if they don't make mistakes. On the other hand, we in the transatlantic region, the Americas and Western and Central Europe, we are up the creek, or down it, as you may choose. That's the situation. So therefore, you're not talking about a war in the sense of contention among nations as to who's going to win the war. You're talking about something quite different. You're talking about the tradition of the infamous Zeus, against, huh? Yeah. So that's where we stand. So the issue here is it would be impossible if we had some intelligence among our politicians in the United States and in some nations of Europe. If we had some decency, a decent understanding of what the issues are, we would not be subject to the threat of a thermonuclear attack now. But as long as the British Empire and what it represents feels itself capable of running extinction warfare in the world to control the world's population by extinction warfare, not warfare against nations, extinction warfare. As long as the American people are stupid enough to keep this jerk, Obama, in power, then the people of the United States may be voting for their own extermination.
Well, as Lynn just referred to, the world has dramatically changed since Ukraine refused to capitulate to the EU. On Christmas Eve of this week, this past Tuesday, there was a very historic meeting in Moscow of the leaders of the Eurasian Supreme Economic Council, consisting of the heads of state of the three member nations of the emerging customs union, Russia, Belarus, and Kazakhstan, plus three observer nations, Kyrgyzstan, Armenia, and Ukraine. And this meeting was convened to lay the groundwork for the creation of the Eurasian Economic Union, which is scheduled to launch on January 1st, 2015, just a few days over a year from now. And the day after this meeting took place, Lynn, you immediately responded, as you did here today already, by stating that this indicates the end of the old imperial system, which has dominated the planet to this day, and the creation of an entirely new system. You stated that this new Eurasian integration is the expression of a post-imperial idea, and that it in fact represents an entirely new conception of statehood itself. And this is very clearly reflected if you take a look at the draft agreement of the Eurasian Economic Union, which was approved in the Moscow meeting this week, which defines the key principles of this integration as being, quote, the mutually advantageous cooperation for converging our economies, for their harmonious development, and for the enhancing of competitiveness, and that the implementation of these principles is aimed primarily at improving the well-being of our citizens. And in President Putin's opening remarks to the group, he explained that this type of integration, in his words, will create the conditions for the dynamic development of all of our countries, stressing that the aim is to reduce mutual trade in raw materials and to increase trade in high technology manufactured goods. Now, to me, these principles sound very much like what was expressed by U.S. President John Quincy Adams when he spoke of a community of sovereign nation states cooperating with each other according to the Westphalian principle of mutual benefit. And also, one can definitely hear the echo of the U.S. constitutional principle of the promotion of the general welfare in the commitment to the improving of the well-being of the citizens. Now, I'd like to put this in here and then ask for your response. If you take a look at Franklin Roosevelt's vision for the post-war world, as Lynn just referred to it, What FDR actually intended was very different than what emerged from the special relationship between Truman and Winston Churchill after FDR died. It's very useful to go back to the Christmas Eve fireside chat that Franklin Roosevelt delivered in 1943 after he returned from the Tehran Conference. And he describes the vision that he shared in his discussions with Stalin. This is a quote from the fireside chat. He says, "In these conferences, we were concerned with basic principles which involve the security and the welfare and the standard of living of human beings in countries large and small." He says, to use an American and somewhat ungrammatical colloquialism, I may say that I got along fine with Marshal Stalin. He is a man who combines a tremendous, relentless determination with a stalwart good humor. I believe he is truly representative of the heart and soul of Russia, and I believe that we are going to get along very well with him and the Russian people, very well indeed. And Roosevelt went on to stress that after the war, the responsibility of the Allies was to be united with and cooperate with all of the freedom-loving peoples of Europe and Asia and Africa and the Americas. The rights of every nation, large or small, must be respected and guarded as jealously as are the rights of every individual within our republic. And then just one more item. This Tehran meeting is also described in detail in Elliot Roosevelt's book, As He Saw It, in which Roosevelt says that he and Stalin talked about, quote, how to unify our policies and to mesh our individual nations' interests in the interests of a general security of the whole world. And he said that his biggest task, his biggest responsibility, was to make it clear to Stalin that the United States and Great Britain were not allied in one common bloc against the Soviet Union. And he said the one thing that could upset the apple cart after the war is if the world is divided again, Russia against England and us. That's our big job now, and it will be our big job tomorrow, too. So I wanted you to, when one takes a look at FDR's outlook for the post-war world, and then you go back and you read the stated goals of this Eurasian Economic Union, it's very clear that indeed we are looking at the possibility of a revival of FDR's vision of relations among sovereign states. And I wanted you to say something about this new conception of statehood.
Well, you have to go back a little bit further, because there's a point in history which is usually treated as mythology, but which is not mythology. It's a point of history in which there you have two figures. One is the fire bringer, and the other is the bastard. Now, that issue, that division between Zeus and Prometheus. Now, what's happened is there are certain aspects of this knowledge which is certain, but the qualifications are buried with a little mythology attached to it. In other words, it's a story which is true, but the explanation has been buried a bit in terms of mythologies. But you had two factions, and the faction is defined very clearly. It's defined by the advocates themselves very clearly. One is the imperial system, Zeus. Right? Zeus is the person who's against the man's use of fire. And opposing him is the proponent of the use of man's use of fire. Now, what's the difference mean? This is not mythology, this is fact. Because the characteristic of mankind is that mankind is the only creature, living creature, which exists on the basis of the mastery of the use of fire. Whereas he is the opponent of the evil Zeus. And Zeus is the one who's the suppression of the use of fire. Now that continues all the way from this point in the myths of mythology back into current times, known times. And that's what the issue is. Now, the two systems, like the Roman Empire is a typical example of this, well known. All right, the Roman Empire was pure evil. There was nothing good in the Roman Empire. There's no leader of the Roman Empire who's good. You have Cicero, for example, is an exception to the empire. He's opposed to it. Huh? So that's the issue. The issue is the oligarchical system, which says that mankind will not invest in fire, in the use of fire for increasing the productive powers of labor of mankind. That's the issue. So therefore you have the whole imperial tradition, as it became known, is actually this thing of the Zeus phenomenon. The Roman Empire was evil. There was nothing good in the Roman Empire ever. And similar empires were never anything good in them. They were evil. The fact that they continued to exist was an evil. The empires that we've had in Europe, evil. Why did we form an organization inside the United States, what became the United States? It was because we knew, as Nicholas of Cusa understood and preached, that you cannot, you cannot live under empire. You cannot live under the Zeus system. So we went across the water, and in New England, in that century, in the course of that century, or at least a few decades of it, we created the most modern form of idea of society that is ever known to man. And that was the Massachusetts Bay Colony. It was crushed by what? By the Anglo-Dutch forces, which were part of the Zeus faction. So you're talking about Roman Empire, Zeus, Roman Empire, and the British. The same thing, the Anglo-Dutch. And the Dutch were worse than the British. As a matter of fact, it was the Dutch who created the British Empire, not the English. The English kingdom was one thing, but what happened is the English kingdom was taken over by the Dutch, and the Dutch Empire took over. And the Dutch Empire was a sequel to the religious warfare of a whole century. And so we in North America, we launched something which was not something which was born in North America. It was born among people who got out of Europe in order to contribute to the development away from imperialism. The Bismarck principle. Bismarck is a man who was completely dedicated to the same intention as the United States. As a matter of fact, Bismarck's ideas came from the United States. It was his conception. And as long as he remained in power in Germany, you could keep the British under control. It was only at that point that this thing went wrong. And you have from the beginning the ouster of Bismarck to the present time has been a period of predominant evil. We in the United States, since the crushing of Bismarck, and his policies were based on those of the United States, on the Lincoln policies. They were based on the American policies. You had a great influence from Europe into the United States and other parts of the Americas. Why? Because we represented something which they could cling to with all the imperfections we had in our own system at that time. And as long as we or people in Europe in power could connect to the United States, World War I could not have happened. The minute Bismarck left, you began to get assassinations. The assassination of the King of France, for example, and a whole series of other assassinations. And the whole thing fell apart. And we've been at war and in hell on the way down ever since that time. So what are we doing to us now? They say, You can't use fire. You mustn't use nuclear power. You must never use it. That's the new policy of the 1960s and 70s. So now what was happened is, under British influence and similar kinds of influence, we have destroyed our own technology. We lost our auto industry. We lost our steel industry. We lost everything. How? Under certain presidents who were opposed to President Franklin Roosevelt. And the minute that Franklin Roosevelt was dead, they began to destroy the United States. But then somebody kicked back, and you had another president. Someone wasn't too bad, a good veteran, but one who led a fiery struggle. And that saved us. Then they killed him. And they killed his brother. And once they'd done that, they turned the United States into a complete catastrophe, with orders from the Queen of England, and orders from similar people like that, similar in Europe. So the point is, we are in this situation. Here we are. We're part of a system, the transatlantic system, the transatlantic empire, should we say, because that's what it is now. The United States has no power. Obama dictates the power. He pays no attention to anyone. The institutions that are running the United States control powerfully. The Snowden case is an example of the reaction against this thing. And if you allow Obama to remain president, well, expect the hell you're going to get by your own hands, by your own foolishness and giving way to this guy. Cowards who is squeamish cowards who allow this to happen. This is what the issue is. Now, now you have a situation. The world as a whole is essentially divided between two forces. One, the transatlantic region as such. That's the doom faction. And we're part in the United States of the doom faction, unless we can free ourselves from it. And on the other side, you have a Eurasian faction, which comes from Belarus all the way to China and across. And that part of the world, which is the new part of the world, the landing on Mars, which is beyond any other landing of that type which has occurred so far. It shows you the difference between the progress of Asia now, or certain parts of Asia now, in this effort, as opposed to the self-destruction of the foolish, silly people of the United States who still put up with this kind of crap. And that's what the issue is. If we would mobilize and throw this bum out, and we have every reason to do so, you don't need a pretext. The evidence is all there. This guy is starving people to death. He's committing crimes of all nature on a scale never seen before in the United States. You mean we can't impeach him? Who are the gutless wonders who refuse to impeach him? Throw them out too. We need a new batch who think differently. But this is what the issue is. This is not some technical thing where someone's got a grievance and it's an injustice and we're going to punish somebody for committing an injustice. This is not it. You're talking about mankind. The principle which governs the United States today and the Anglo-Dutch power today is evil. It is pure evil. And if you cannot remove that evil from this planet, you're not going to have a human species. Because if the rest of the world were to go the direction that the transatlantic region has gone, then the whole world will go to hell fast. This is not an issue of grievances on some minor issues or secondary issues or even important ones. This is a question of, we have a human species. This human species, ours, the human species, has capabilities far, far beyond any other variety of red-blooded people. No animal can match the people of America, the American people, the human people. Huh? Not the Zeus people. Huh? And so you have a contention. Which side are you on? What are you going to do about it? And talking about who's going to be a good president, who's going to do this, who's promising this, who's got the good guy, who said the bad things, that's not an issue anymore. We're dealing with we came close, very close. Had the Ukraine capitulated fully to Europe, I would say the probability is a road to human extinction, beginning with thermonuclear attacks or equivalent attacks on Russia. And if Russia had been left unprotected on its Ukraine front, then it would have been feasible to launch a thermonuclear attack, or which would be used to destroy most of the human population by the same methods that Obama is applying right now, beginning of this next year, against the people of the United States. And that's the issue. And the Queen of England is an accomplice in this plan of mass murder of human beings. The Dutch part of the system, which is really the author of the British part, is guilty. We have lost our Constitution. We still have it on the wall for those who care to admire it. But when it comes to practice by our Congress or by most of our institutions of government, there is no Constitution. It's only an entertainment, not a substantive quality of a government.
Let me pick up on what you said about Edward Snowden. Earlier this week, there was an extensive interview published with Edward Snowden by Bart Gellman in the Washington Post. And in that interview, Snowden responds to those close to Obama who have accused him of treason for violating the oath of secrecy. And he says, in fact, my disclosure of classified material is by no way a violation of my oath. My oath is to the United States Constitution and to defend the United States Constitution. And when my own government is violating the United States Constitution, they're the ones who have broken their oath, including Keith Alexander, including James Clapper, who lied to Congress and who are covering up for what this administration is doing with NSA surveillance. Also, in the interview, Snowden equates the NSA's warrantless surveillance with the use of general warrants, or what were called writs of assistance, by the British in pre-revolutionary America, noting that the last time that happened, we fought a war over it. And ironically, Snowden was also invited by Britain's Channel 4 television to give what they call their alternative Christmas message to the royal Christmas message of Queen Elizabeth. And in that message, he said, George Orwell's 1984 comes nowhere close to what the capabilities are now, including, sensors in our pockets that are tracking us everywhere we go. And he said, a child born today will grow up with no conception of privacy at all. This is a global police state. The problem, this is a problem because for individual human beings, privacy matters. Privacy is what allows us to determine who we are and who we want to be. And Glenn Greenwald echoed this same idea, and I think gave it an even more developed perspective when he gave testimony to the European Parliament this week. He asked, why do we need privacy? And then he answered his own question. Because if we think that everything we do or say is subject to eavesdropping, we become conformists. This prevents creativity. And this is why police states love surveillance. So I guess the question I'd like to ask, Lynn, is how do these actions of Snowden and his network to expose this modern Gestapo-type system of the new British Empire, how does this tie into what is happening with this global realignment of power that's emanating from Eurasia now?
Well, it's simple. What we've done, we've accepted a law, which is the Zeus law. We've allowed that, which is the challenge of evil. So therefore, what we're dealing with is not issues. We're dealing with a question of evil. And what is controlling the United States today is evil. These things, which are called laws now, are not laws. They're not laws under our Constitution. There's no provision in the Constitution for this. There's no basis in the Constitution for this. And also the very existence of these measures is a violation of the Constitution. So it's not merely the lack of authority, it's the fact that what they're saying about the Constitution is a lie. And if you're telling a lie, then you don't have to, you're not guilty, they are. And if they want to come and do it, then you're going to have to go out and fight a war. So now this is the issue. You have Zeus, the Roman Empire tradition, the idea that mankind cannot use fire to increase the power of man per capita to produce and to change nature, to change the universe. That's man's power. It's the creative power. Creativity is the means to change, to increase the power of the human species to exist and to achieve things that are necessary. That's the difference between man and beast. Their law is the law of the beast. My law is the law of man. It's Zeus, the evil of Zeus, as the Roman Empire and the British Empire, the Dutch Empire typify that. That's one force. The other force is mankind, humanity. And we have a law, the United States, and the law, our Constitution, and the precedents for that Constitution is the defense of the progress of mankind to the cause of human freedom to progress, not to be forced down, but to progress. Now, for example, simple case. Here we are, we're in the solar system. Just imagine you're in the solar system. For some people, they'd have to imagine that. Their education is not too good these days. Therefore, what's our function? Well, we're out there with all those big rocks. And these big rocks have millions of them, perhaps, out there waiting for us. And they can hit us, and many of these rocks, they do hit us from time to time. But one of the big ones comes along, it'll take about 1/3 of the population of the planet away. And a little bigger rock hitting harder will exterminate the human species. Now, our real concern should be to save the human species, unless somebody wants to go on a big, suicide junket. And therefore, if we're going to defend the existence of the human species, we're going to need to use fire. We're going to have to go to the side of guess whom. So therefore, we're going to have to do that, and we're going to go to higher and higher technologies. We're going to fire. The fire principle of Prometheus. Raise the intensity of the fire by man's ingenuity, man's creativity. Increase the ability to defend the human species. Acquire now the ability to intervene with these rocks, these giant rocks, which could either exterminate a good part of the human population on Earth or even the entirety of it. We have to at some point defend ourselves against those big rocks. And there are many other things. We have to realize that we're not just earthlings. We're living in a solar system in particular, which in an oligarchy, side of system as well. And therefore, we have to be able to progress. We have a duty to all mankind to make those steps of progress, which China is making, for example, presently on the moon. What China is doing on the moon is a new improvement which has never been done in terms of dealing with the moon before. And this is a step, a necessary step, because the first thing they're going to local planets and local stops, like the Mars and so forth. That's not going to save you, because you have to get the means to intervene in Mars if you want to do something about that. And you're not going to get the means to Mars if with our present technology, if you're going to try to pump lead or pump fusion or something into that. It's not going to work, because you can't do it, because it'll cost you too much to get to Mars, to get to the moon from Earth, to get a good start on doing something about these problems. So therefore, mankind has to go to the moon. And China is doing it. And China is doing the right thing. The United States is doing the wrong thing. We call Obama a lunatic for precisely that reason. So the point is, mankind has a natural goal, because once we recognize that we have a creative capability, which is a fire-bringing capability, the ability of mankind to exist depends upon the ability to increase the energy flux density which is controlled by man. And as we rise to thermonuclear fusion, that's how mankind can say to our people, this we can save you, we can defend you. Only by that means. And therefore, everything that is being done in policy making since the assassination of John F. Kennedy by the United States is wrong. It's going in the wrong direction against the human race. There's a mission out there. Going to the moon is not a fantasy. Going to the moon means we have a base up there from which to operate at much lower cost than any other way. From there, if we can set off thermonuclear fusion drivers, we can reach other parts of this solar system more quickly, especially the nearby parts, such as Mars and all these satellites and so forth in there. And that is a principle of our defense, to mobilize ourselves to prepare to defend the existence of the human species, which is actually under threat. And these things are flying by, they miss us again and again, we're lucky. Eventually we won't be lucky. One of these things will hit, and the human species will be out of business. And therefore we have a natural requirement for thermonuclear fusion power, which has been shut down since the beginning of the 1970s. Oh, they play with it now. People toy with it, but there's no serious project effort to get that thing done. If we get a thermonuclear fusion driver, which may take us a dozen years even from now to get it done, and once we get there, we then have an opening to an entirely new, higher quality of achievement. This is the natural character of mankind, to be a creative person as no animal can be, whereas Zeus is an animal.
Well, in that light, I have a question about the potential of China. You've outlined again here tonight that the landing on the moon by China is of great significance. Now, aside from the development of a continued mission on the moon, and it's good to keep in mind that the lander portion of the rover was designed to carry a much larger payload than the rover itself. So you had research and development happening even in the middle of the mission. Now, China has also been involved in helping other nations reach out and touch the heavens, considering the collaboration among nations in space as key to diplomacy, which is reminiscent of the United States under John F. Kennedy. There was an article published in The Diplomat, which is a Japanese publication covering the Asian Pacific, which outlines the collaboration by the Chinese on launching satellites with Nigeria, Pakistan, Venezuela, Turkey, Bolivia, with projects in the works for Turkmenistan, Sri Lanka, and Belarus. Now, in the particular case of Bolivia, part of the package was the training of 78 Bolivians so that they will be able to operate the newly launched communication satellite as a sovereign nation. The Chinese have provided this training and education for other nations that they've partnered up with on satellites. Now, according to Xinhua, Bolivia is considering collaborating with China again with the head of their space agency, Ivan Zambrana, being quoted saying, "We wish to launch a remote sensing satellite in 2017, and China is one of our best alternatives." So you have the proliferation of science, technology, education on a mutually beneficial basis. Both nations prosper by this. Now, at the same time, in the case of Bolivia, if they do proceed with their intent as stated by Mr. Zambrana, this will mean that they will have the ingredients for precision agriculture as a sovereign nation. With a communication satellite and a remote sensing satellite, you have the beginnings of the capability to run agricultural operations in a much more efficient manner, being able to see from above what you can't necessarily see from on the ground, and in much greater bandwidths, and then the capability to run your equipment with far more precision. Now, Mr. Zambrana didn't say that that was the particular intention of Bolivia in this case, but this is the type of potential which is being unleashed by the Chinese, and I think that's important. When you go back to the situation with Ukraine, one of the worries was that the large international farming systems would come in and eat up the Ukrainian farms as a consequence of them joining with the EU, which would be catastrophic to the Ukrainians. It would have been catastrophic to Europe with the dumping of the cereal grains at low prices. While on the other hand, here we have China providing the means by which smaller nations can break out of this imperial system altogether. So what I'd like you to, if you could, elaborate on the potential and the dynamic overall on the ground that has been set in motion with the success of the Chinese landing.
Well, first of all, you've probably changed the subject a little bit to get at the point. Look, the issue here is the classic issue, is the increase of the energy flux density which mankind is able to command. So particular objectives, such as goals for the cultivation of this and cultivation of that, really are not the issue and should be treated as secondary questions. Because if we can improve the technological capabilities, by sharing those technological capabilities, we can obviously increase man's options. But mankind has to be foremost concentrate on developing those technologies. And remember, you've got to look at the table of chemistry. I know chemists sometimes are terrible, and university professors in chemistry are sometimes worse. But because they get involved in too much detail, too much formalities. And the other part in education is the fact that people are so concerned about what they achieve, or what they think they achieve, that they don't understand the importance of advancing to higher energy flux densities. In other words, the ability to apply a certain energy flux density is not necessarily an achievement, if that means you're going to sacrifice going to a higher one. For example, what is holding back the possibility of a rapid recovery of the planet Earth, and particularly in the United States itself, is the fact that we have not increased the energy flux density. We do not have a thermonuclear fusion driver, which has been sitting on our lap as a potential since the 1970s, which is what I got recruited into, that option. So therefore, the importance of us is to develop the quality of productivity available. That doesn't mean spread the good news. It means concentrating on getting as high and as far and as fast as you can first. Then take the result of getting as far and fast as you can, then can be turned into benefits for other people. But you've got to concentrate in the case of China, not to get China to diversify itself, because it has limited capabilities. What it's doing in the moon, and what that design of that is a mission orientation. We're going to use the United States development in China, or the American development in China. We're going to use that as a driver program to increase the rate of a power of mankind. Now, if you increase the rate of power of mankind, then you are going to benefit everyone. If you try to share out the quantity of effort and dilute the quality of effort, you're going to set yourself backwards. So don't talk about sharing good. What you do is creating good. You can't share good if you can't create it first. And that's the point. So therefore, what we need is a thermonuclear driver. What we need to do is get people who are stupid, but are professors, to stop being stupid or stop being professors, one of the two. And that's our problem. So the point is what China has done. Here we have, what has China done? Well, China has been worked on various advantages available to it from the United States. It also involves relationships among many nations who are working together in these areas. So therefore, what we're doing, we're trying to concentrate rate of advancement as opposed to breadth of an accelerated transit. And that should be our policy. So thermonuclear, it probably will take at least a dozen years to realize the potentialities of thermonuclear fusion. It's still been sitting around there. There are a lot of stages that have to go through. It's not some one step from one thing to the other. It's a whole process involved. And what we've been doing, we've been sitting on that and holding it back, deliberately sabotaging it, because we've been told to, instead of doing it. If we had done that, if we had not stopped that in the 1970s, we in the United States would be enriched beyond your dreams. And we'd have taken the rest of the world with us in terms of those advances. Because that kind of power means achievements that are otherwise impossible. And therefore, what you have to do is always go first for the impossible dream. And once you've realized that, then share it. But first do it. First get that impossible dream. And that's what we have to do. We have broken down the United States. Our people are dying, literally dying, of the policies of this government. They're being murdered, and the rate of murder is going to accelerate during every week that passes now. So therefore, the first thing you have to do, before talking about good efforts, throw that bum out of the presidency. If you throw that bum out of the presidency, now you can talk about the good things you might be able to do. As long as that bum is the president, you're not going to be able to do anything. And that's what you have to tell to those stupid politicians who don't listen and don't want to think and don't want to face the truth. We are falling behind. We have fallen behind. People accept the green policy. They're not fit. They're not human anymore. They're animals. They have given up their right to be human beings, and they're behaving like animals. You drop, animals who are less capable than they were in the previous generation. And that's what we've got. We've got children there coming out of schools, being educated. They're more and more close to the animal status with each generation. We have a whole generation of young people who entered adulthood, adolescence and adulthood, during the period of the Obama administration and its predecessor. We have destroyed the ability of the people of the United States. We've taken it away from them, the skills that they did have. It's been taken away from them. They shipped them out of crime. They canceled them. And you're talking about progress? You've got to throw the enemies of progress out of the window or whatever. Once we do that, once we decide we're going to do that, then we can make some progress. If you talk about the way people are talking now, in terms of what they consider acceptable policy making, they're going to kill people. Because they already have the policies to which they're committed. They are making the votes now in the houses of Congress and elsewhere. They're making the votes which will express the increased killing rate of American people. And you want to vote for these guys to stay in power? Don't preach fine formulas. Give us some action. We've got people who are dying and condemned to die under the policies of this president and this Congress now. We're talking about mass killing. We're also talking about the kind of folly that can lead to a thermonuclear war, which can be an extinction war if it happens, or something like that. What are we talking about? You're talking about doing good things? How can you do good things if you're not stopping the bad things? How can you help people if you won't give them, you won't let the doctors give them treatment? And that's our problem now. We have to reach a higher standard. We have to say, look, this crap has to cease now. Otherwise, we aren't going to be a nation anymore. And the danger is that under the influence of the Anglo-Dutch problem in Europe, coming into Wall Street and so forth, the Wall Street crowd, extinguish Wall Street. Get rid of Wall Street. Just cancel it. We can create a new banking system immediately. We don't have to take these permanent deficits that they're using on us. But take the kind of measures as citizens in voting and organizing the vote, which will address these questions. We are in grave danger from our own stupidities, our own capitulations to these kinds of things. Trying to be nice to monsters. You get eaten that way.
Okay. Have one final question for the evening, which is on Glass-Steagall. In Europe, there has been a lot of motion on Glass-Steagall. In 5 nations, there have been some sort or another of parliamentary motions and legislation put forward, these nations being Italy, Iceland, Belgium, Sweden, and Switzerland. Now, in Denmark, Finland, Norway, Greenland, France, Germany, Greece, Ireland, San Marino, Spain, and even in Great Britain, there have been activism and advocacy for Glass-Steagall from municipalities, from regional assemblies, individual parliamentarians, including letters to the United States Congress, and appearances by European leaders to Washington, D.C. to speak with representatives and senators in person. There is a huge potential for a breakout on Glass-Steagall in opposition to the dying system of transatlantic finance, should it be unleashed. It seems the biggest block to this, or the biggest catalyst for this thing to really take off, is the United States. Now, we've discussed the idea of American exceptionalism on this program here before in a slightly different context. At that time, it was with Russian President Putin dealing with Barack Obama. But on this question of Glass-Steagall, given the amount of motion and potential in other nations involved with the transatlantic system, could you elaborate on why it is that the United States is pivotal to this fight? Why it is that the financial enemy needs to be defeated here in order to unleash this potential which is in Europe?
Well, Glass-Steagall is a name. It's not a project. It's a name given to something which should be a project. But people talk about the term Glass-Steagall. They don't talk about what the term means. That's where the first problem we deal with. Now, Glass-Steagall means, essentially, canceling Wall Street. That's what it means. If you don't cancel Wall Street, you're not going to get Glass-Steagall, either in name or in effect. So therefore, what you have to do, the whole Wall Street operation has always been a swindle. Wall Street should be simply shut down. Because what we can see, what you do, how would you shut Wall Street down? It's very simple. Wall Street contains two ingredients. It contains some things that are real, but they are in the wrong hands. So close down Wall Street, but take the banking system and look at it, and if there's something in it that's actually worth living, we will protect it. If it's worth doing. If it's making super profits, remember, they have done in the whole period, this whole recent period, in the United States, not 1 cent has been given to actually increasing anything. So there has been no benefit to the people of the United States from this program, the counter program. The cancellation of Glass-Steagall was a disaster. So you want to have to eliminate the cancellation of Glass-Steagall. You don't have to get Glass-Steagall, you have to get rid of the cancellation of it. That what you do, you reconcentrate all the real assets, the physical assets, which are logged up in all the banking systems. You keep the banking systems which are actually banking systems and not gambling centers. And you consolidate those in a reorganized national banking system. That takes simply one stroke of a process of law to create a renewed, refreshed federal banking system. And we need a federal banking system composed of public and private banks alike. These banks, if they're actually doing a job of banking, as I would understand banking, that's all fine. That's all we have to do. But all these phony profits, all this crap, it should be eliminated. The fact that somebody has a piece of legislation or piece of paper that says they own this, that does not mean that they represent property which could be defended. You know, cocaine is a substance, right? And you're going to keep it because it's a substance? You're going to buy more of it because it's a substance? No, you're going to eliminate the use of this stuff. And what we're getting is the equivalent of super cocaine in the form of the gold, this Wall Street system. So let's get the cocaine out of the Wall Street system, and take the residue, which is not Wall Street, and put that and say, okay, we'll transfer since these are assets. If they are really assets, from even this crazy, filthy thing, we will willingly absorb those into real banks, or even create new banks to do that. We will cancel everything that smells like Wall Street. And we won't even pay anybody for any, because we can prove it's a fraud. We can prove that this has been a fraud all the way through. And as a matter of fact, it goes all the way back, because what happened in New York, look at Alexander Hamilton. And look at Alexander Hamilton's problems with the city of New York, the city and state of New York, but especially the city. What had happened is the Anglo-Dutch interests had early on, beginning with the 17th century, had begun to accumulate banking institutions which they controlled in the area of New Netherlands. This became the attraction center, together with various British banking systems, which took over and established a grip on the United States, and New York was being pulled out of respectable institutions. Like Jefferson was a fraud. Jefferson was a faker and an accomplice in this crime. And much of the damage done to the United States was done with Jefferson's accomplice role. And so these are the kinds of things that go on in real history. So let's not talk about terms, words, names. Let's talk about substance. And people have investments which are in trust in banking systems, legitimate banking system of the United States under our system. So we will reconsolidate these things to protect legitimate banking. And we know what legitimate banking is. We may change some rules because some of the rules are not too good. But these rules will actually protect the interests of the people of the United States and all honest people who are running in banking. It's the way it worked with Hamilton. Fine, it'll work again. Cancel the swindlers. It's that they committed swindles, you're not going to protect their assets. So therefore, that's the issue. So what we have to do is create a real banking system, an American banking system. Don't use the term this or that term. Make sure that the words you're using have a meaning that you are not need be ashamed of. And therefore, that's what we have to do. We have to put these guys who are swindlers. They've been swindling the people of the United States and actually killing them by the various economic methods. We have to fix that. We have to restore this thing. Also, that the rules of behavior pertaining especially to finance of the United States today are rules of criminal behavior. And that's the characteristic of the Bush family rules, as Vice President Bush and President Bush and Obama. The record is one of crooks and thugs. We don't want those kinds of people as presidents or vice presidents anymore. We've had too many crooks in the presidency of the United States under foreign influences exerted through financial means against the United States and its people, and assassinations and other means of killing presidents they don't like in order to get stooges who will do their liking. No, we in the United States, we have to become honorably citizens of the United States. We have to have true patriotism, a loyalty to the legitimate intention of our nation and of its people. You cannot do mass killing of people, which is being done by the Obama administration and its accomplices now, and is about to increase it greatly immediately on the beginning of the next year, and call yourself a citizen. You're not a citizen. You're a scoundrel. And we are in a point where, yes, there is a new area. Go back one step, back to Roosevelt's point. Roosevelt's negotiation with Stalin et al. Now, this was a bad time because the Republicans had taken over a large degree of control over the policies of the United States during that term of office. This had reduced the capability and resources of the President of the United States, and his presidency had reduced it greatly. And he was becoming quite ill as a result of the burdens of this involved. So he's about to die. And he knew he's about to die. And the enemy, which is Truman, was the leading enemy. He was the leading stooge for the British Empire. And everything that Roosevelt had done on his own account, in this respect, was to make agreements very much like, in some flavor, exactly what Russia has pulled together now, in terms from Belarus to the Pacific and so forth. Huh? What's this? A group of nations which are sovereign but are working together under a system of agreements. Huh? Now that's what we always wanted. That's exactly what Franklin Roosevelt negotiated with Stalin and others in his last meeting there. So how do we lose that? Who changed that? Well, it was changed by Winston Churchill. And guess who? The new President of the United States. The traitor who started the whole process, along with the FBI, and the FBI's new creation, they moved in with the new Republican sweep into the election. They moved in a large scale and began to grab power through the Republican Party and through Democrats who connived with it. And that is what destroyed the United States. That's what made the treason possible. And what was wrong with the Republicans? They're too much like the Republicans that Roosevelt had thrown out, bred back in again. And that is the thing that has destroyed our United States ever since, that happened. Had Franklin Roosevelt been enabled to secure the victory over the Nazis during his life, during that period, there would have been no such thing. It was the wear and tear of warfare under extended conditions that allowed these things to happen. And the scumbags, shall we say, crawled back into power. And they are the ones who represented what we call the Truman administration. And we had a Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, who was selected by Eleanor Roosevelt as her candidate for President of the United States. And he did a good job. She did an excellent job. And they killed him. What happened? The murderers triumphed and celebrated. And we sent our children to war in Indochina. We sent them over there and taught them how to suck drugs. They turned them into vegetables, drug-eating vegetables. And that was used to destroy the United States and its people, and to start us on the big slide all the way down to the hellhole we're in today.
Well, with that, I want to bring a conclusion to our broadcast tonight. We've covered a lot of territory, and I want to thank Lynn for joining us. And we will reconvene, same time, same place, next week, which will be next year. Thanks for tuning in. Good night.